Hello, today we're going to have a discussion about religious pathways and destinations. You'll find this topic included in chapter 3 of Pargament's book. Do you remember Kenneth Pargament's definition of religion? The search for significance in ways related to the sacred. So for Pargament, every search involves two things: a path and a destination. And religion is concerned with both of these, both the pathways that we take and the destinations we pursue when we have a religious orientation to life. And both of these areas are of interest to people who study the psychology of religion. So let's talk about pathways first. One of the things we learn is that all of the world's religions offer pathways that we can follow in the search for significance. And these pathways are often portrayed as difficult. I'd like to read for you briefly from our book on page 34. The Hindu hears that the path is like the sharp edge of a razor. Narrow it is and difficult to tread. The Christian is told, narrow is the gate and constricted the road that leads to life. The Buddhist hears the path to salvation likened to the difficulty of fording a roiling stream. But the ultimate rewards awaiting the dedicated traveler, the religious say, are well worth the trek. So what are the pathways that we can follow in the search for significance? Pargament identifies 4 possible pathways we can take: emotions, thoughts, actions, and relationships. All of these are pathways down which we may travel in the search for significance in our lives. So let's talk about feelings first. For many of us, feelings are the central part of our religious experience, or what Pargament calls the cornerstone of religious experience. I'd like to share with you another quote from our book on page 35, where Rudolf Otto says, in his book, The Idea of the Holy, the essence of religious experience is a creature feeling, an emotion of a creature abased and overwhelmed by its own nothingness, in contrast to that which is supreme above all others. This emotion, which Otto calls mysterium tremendum, also has the qualities of a magnet, something that captivates and transports the person with a strange ravishment, rising often enough to the pitch of dizzy intoxication. For Otto, this feeling cannot be reduced to any other. It flows directly out of an absolutely convincing experience with the Holy Mother. Well, I don't know about you, but I'll have to say that I've never actually had this experience that Otto is describing. Although I have had many intimate moments of deep feeling in connection with my relationship with God. So many of us may experience the sacred in less emotionally powerful ways than he described, but not less meaningful ways. So I'd like to ask you to think about what are some ways in which you experience the sacred when you follow the pathway of emotion. Whenever we pause during our discussions and I ask you these kinds of questions, I hope that you will feel free to stop the video, pause it, think about the question, even beyond the time that I allow, and maybe even write down some thoughts in response to that question to allow you to be more deeply engaged in the discussions. So Parkman also points out that religious pathways are not limited to emotions or what he calls matters of the heart. But they also include matters of the head and the pathway that he refers to as thinking. And for some of us, the thinking pathway is a very important way in which we pursue the sacred and religious destinations in our lives through this pathway of thinking. So our understanding of things would be an example of the thinking pathway. What we believe about things would be an example of the thinking pathway. For example, what do you believe about the nature of God? Do you think of God in the singular sense? Or do you think of God in the tripartite sense, like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? How do you think about God? What do you believe about salvation, about eternity, about forgiveness, about grace? These are all examples of the thinking dimension as one of the pathways down which we travel to achieve religious destinations in our lives. And another is acting. And for many people, this is an extremely important religious pathway. How we act, how we live out our daily lives, the choices that we make, how we treat other people, how we serve our fellow humans. These are all examples of actions that we take. And actions are a part of all religions. They have power when they are connected to the sacred. And then finally, Parkman talks about relating as another pathway towards which we can travel, down which we can travel, towards religious destinations in our lives. So relating, of course, has to do with our relationships with God and with one another. And Mosentelligwiesen would also say, with all of creation. We've already looked at how Martin Buber believes that it is through relationships that we experience God in a more intimate kind of way. And we've also considered how being relational is one of the themes that Mosentelligwiesen talked about in looking at their 5 biblical themes of human nature. So I'd like to ask you to think about the relationships in your life and how those relationships serve as a pathway towards religious significance in your life. It could be your partner, friends, family members, a congregation, a Bible study group, people that you serve every day in your work world, where you are able to see the spark of God in the face of those people. Pargament also talks about how we have various possible destinations of significance that we pursue in a religious life. You'll find these discussed in Pargament around page 47 and going forward. One of the destinations is meaning. We already talked about meaning earlier when we looked at Viktor Frankl's life and how he discovered when he was imprisoned in 2 concentration camps during World War II that those people who had a desire to live found meaning in their suffering and wanted to go on, oftentimes so that they could be reunited with their loved ones. One of the things that you've probably already come to appreciate from your readings so far is how a religious orienting system provides us with a framework to make sense of our existence here on this earth and to have a way of struggling with questions having to do with some of the ultimate issues in life, such as why do bad things happen to good people? Why do we have to suffer? Why is there evil in the world? And other questions with which we might struggle. Another religious destination that Pargament mentions is comfort. We've already seen how Freud, who was an adversary really to religion, did talk about how we may turn to religion for comfort from the harsh realities of the world, and also as a way of helping us to have better control over our own impulses. But when we think about comfort from a religious perspective, we can appreciate how our faith, belief in God, living out our faith every day, turning to God for comfort during times of struggle can be an important religious destination that many of us have. Another destination that Pargament mentions is what he calls the search for self. How we hopefully come to gain a better understanding of who we are in the context of our religious orientation to life. and may view ourselves, say, as a child of God, and how that influences our identity when we incorporate into our sense of self the sacred. This is a process that we will be exploring a little bit more later on in our time together during this course. Hardman also talks about how we can seek health. Physical health, mental health might also be a destination. And in fact, researchers have found that people who have a religious orientation in life do tend to live lives that are more wholesome and even tend to have a longer life expectancy. These kinds of studies are correlational, so they can't really prove cause and effect, but they are replicated studies looking at some of the benefits of living a religious life and being a part of a religious community. And finally, another destination that Hardiman includes is what he calls the search for community. And this includes a destination of intimacy with God and with other people. We've already looked at how relationships can be a pathway, and intimacy in our relationships with God and others can be a destination that we hope to achieve. Again, we looked at Martin Buber and his ideas about how we can catch a glimpse of God when we relate to other people as what he calls the thou. And what he means by that is we relate to another person with great respect and in a way that allows us to cherish that person in the manner in which we regard them and treat them, as opposed to relating to another person as not a thou, but an it. And when we relate to people in the it kind of way that he talks about, we're asking ourselves, how can I use this person? What can they give me? What can I get out of them? Instead of relating to them with love and respect and an unconditional kind of acceptance of what in a religious context we would call grace. And then finally, in our search for community as a religious destination, Hardman also talks about how we can seek a better world. And here, what we're getting at is our ability to stretch ourselves beyond ourselves, to see ourselves as being part of all of humanity and striving to be connected with all of humanity and living a life of service to others to hopefully make the world a better place while we're still in it. You'll find that an understanding of religious pathways and destinations will be very important when we begin to explore religious coping during times of stress, because we will come to appreciate how both our pathways and our destinations can be threatened during life crises and times of stress. And there are many different ways in which people end up dealing with those difficult times in their lives that have an impact on both their religious pathways and their religious destinations, as we shall see. Several times during our discussions, I've used the term religious orienting system or religious orientation to life. We'll be using this expression throughout our time together. And in Argument's book, around page 63, 64, he gets into a discussion of some of the research that's looked at religious orientations. I believe you also may have a study question on this topic, and you'll find some notes on it in your PowerPoints as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the three different religious orientations to the means and ends of significance that Argument discusses in this part of his book. He begins with a discussion of the researcher Gordon Allport, who was very interested in looking at racial prejudice that existed in religious communities in the mid or so part of the 20th century. And he found it curious that people who profess to be Christian, on the one hand, would have prejudicial attitudes and discriminatory behavior towards other people on the other hand. This to him was sort of hard to understand. It didn't really make sense. But as he explored it further, he was able to figure out that just because somebody is a member of a church or has a certain religious affiliation, it's not one size fits all. And we all know that. If you are a part of a church community or have been in the past, there are vast individual differences among people who are a part of a particular denomination or even a singular congregation. So through his research, Allport identified two different religious orientations: an extrinsic religious orientation and an intrinsic religious orientation. Argument makes an important point in his book that while these are two different religious orientations, a lot of people won't necessarily neatly fall into one of these categories or the other. You may see elements of both in certain individuals. But we're going to be looking at each orientation as being separate so that we can understand some of what Allport is getting at. So I wanted to tell you a story about someone I knew to help us understand some aspects of an extrinsic religious orientation. I knew this individual once who was fairly prominent in his community. He lived in a small town, and he was fairly well thought of. And once, for some reason, we got around to talking about religion. And he said, well, I'm not a very religious person, but I like going to church on Sunday because I like being seen. I think it's important for my image in the community that people see me at church on Sunday. So for me, this is a pretty good example of an extrinsic religious orientation, because basically this individual is looking at it in terms of how can I use religion? What can I get out of religion? And he's seeking personal gain through his religious involvement. The other religious orientation that Allport talks about is what he calls the intrinsic religious orientation. And individuals with an intrinsic religious orientation, they live their religion in their daily lives. It is at the center of their experience. They internalize the sacred, and it is expressed outwardly through their behavior in the way they live their religion. They're not using their religion for some kind of personal gain. They're living their religion as an expression of their faith. And they are seeking spiritual gain through their religion, in whatever form that might take. Say a closer relationship with God, for example. Now another individual named Daniel Batson, he identified a third religious orientation that he calls a quest orientation. And the quest orientation is very similar to the intrinsic religious orientation, with one distinction. And people who have a quest religious orientation are very active in asking questions, seeking answers, being okay with not knowing, being okay with having doubts. And they are able to engage in an active struggle in order to try to gain better understanding. And can even say that, some things are beyond my understanding, and I won't find answers to everything, but I'm going to keep asking those hard questions and see where it takes me. So that is one of the things that's sort of distinctive about the quest orientation, where the individual is seeking, actively seeking truth and meaning through their religion. So here's a question for you to think about. What do you seek from religion? What are your ends and destinations of significance? And what pathways do you pursue to achieve your destinations? I hope you'll give that some thought and see what you come up with. One final topic I would like to discuss with you today is the article by Pargament and Mahoney, published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion, on sacred matters. Absolutely love this article. I just get it out and read it every once in a while because it always inspires me, and I learn something new every time I read the article. So a focus of the article is what Pargament and Mahoney call sanctification. There's some good notes about this article in your PowerPoints. So, how do they define sanctification? They say that it involves perceiving an aspect of life as having divine character and significance. Think about that for a moment. Perceiving an aspect of life as having divine character and significance. So if we sanctify some area of our lives, then we are viewing that area of our lives as being sacred. It's like the mother who said when she looks into the faces of her children, she sees God. Her relationship with her children are sacred. We learn in this article that there are actually two ways in which we can make something sacred in our lives. One is when we see something in our lives as a manifestation or expression of God, like the mother, seeing God in the faces of her children. We see that area of our life as one in which God is actively involved. And through our involvement in that area of our lives, it brings us closer to God. So we might view our children as sacred, our partner as sacred, the people with whom we come in contact in our work as sacred. Whatever it is that we view as sacred in our lives, it alters the way we think about that part of our lives. It enriches the way in which we relate to that part of our lives. So, one way that we can experience the sacred, in which we can sanctify an area of our lives, is when we see it as representing the manifestation of God. I found in my own life that everywhere I turn, important parts of my life I view as sacred. Certainly my relationship with my wife and my children I view as sacred. I view the relationship that I have with students as sacred, and that would include you. And when I view my work in this way as sacred, then it motivates me to want to do the very best I'm capable in everything I undertake in my role as a teacher, and to always try to treat students with love and kindness and respect and fairness. Another way in which we can experience the sacred is when we associate sacred qualities with some object or aspect of our lives without seeing that part of our life as an actual manifestation of God, but yet we have a reverence, you could say, for that object or part of our lives. One example that comes to mind is having respect for the American flag. Most of us have a respect for the American flag. It represents freedom and justice to us. We don't want to see the American flag dragged around. We still want to see it burned. We want to see it being handled in a dignified kind of way. There's an example, I believe it may be in your article, of a woman who had lost her way and had had many problems and ended up in prison. And while there, she found this old, dilapidated chair, which had fallen apart, kind of like she had in a way. And she spent many hours putting this chair back together, refinishing it into a beautiful chair. And this chair was a sacred place for her. It represented redemption, restoration, a new beginning. And she loved to sit in this chair and just reflect on the new person she was becoming. The chair wasn't so much a manifestation of God as it was an object that reminded her of sacred qualities, like the American flag, but in a different way. So these are both ways in which we can view something as sacred. It is an actual manifestation of God, or it is something that has sacred qualities associated with it, but it's not where God is expressed through that object, whatever it happens to be. So the crux of the article, I believe, has to do with looking at how the process of sanctification influences us. That is, when we regard areas of our lives as sacred, what difference does that make in how we live our lives? So Parkman and Mahoney identify 5 different ways in which we may be influenced when we view a part of our lives as being sacred. I'd like to go over these briefly with you. Of course, you'll find them in the article. They're also outlined in your PowerPoint. First one, we invest a great deal of our time and energy in sacred matters. Because those parts of our life are important, we want to devote time and energy to them. The second, we go to great lengths to preserve and protect whatever we perceive as sacred. These parts of our lives we highly value. The people in our lives that we view as sacred are very important to us. So understandably, we want to do everything we can to nurture and protect and keep safe those people and those relationships. Sacred aspects of our life are likely to elicit spiritual emotions of attraction and trepidation, meaning fear. This is the third way in which viewing something in our life as sacred may affect us. The trepidation part, for me, I suppose, has to do with fear of losing someone that I value and whom I regard in a sacred way. The sacred represents a powerful, personal, and social resource. This is the fourth point. So, thinking about relationships and viewing them as sacred, think about how much those relationships and loving and caring for the people in our lives and serving the people in our lives provide us with a sense of purpose and meaning, and how being able to turn to those people for support during times of struggle represents an important social resource for us as well. And then finally, the loss of the sacred can have devastating effects. All we need to do is think about somebody we've lost through death or some other way who was very important to us, how much it hurts, how much we grieve, to appreciate this last point of how the loss of the sacred can have devastating effects. At the end of their article, Parkman and Mahoney make a statement that I wanted to share with you verbatim, because this statement has come to have great personal significance for me. And I have used this statement in various contexts since I read this article the first time. You'll find it in their article on page 196. I think it's towards the very end of the article, if I'm remembering correctly. And it goes like this. The study of sanctification suggests a way to open up the scientific study of religion to a variety of phenomena of interest. Indeed, it directs our attention to perhaps the most appropriate place of our field, where heaven meets earth. Thank you. I look forward to talking with you again soon.